Alright, so I want to take this time real quick to talk about Robert Zemeckis' remake of The Witches, which just went up to streaming, and this was one of those things that felt like it should be like a big deal, but still feel like it wasn't really that long ago that I learned about its existence. Like I think it was like maybe in the spring I looked up when all this stuff was going down and movies were either getting canceled or pushed. It was like what movies are coming out in 2020, and that list that came up was the first time I had heard that this was happening. And it seems like it should be a big deal not only because it is, Zemeckis doing another movie, which used to be, kind of an event. Not to say that his filmography is flawless, because it's certainly not. But it still feels like a big deal. He still has enough reverence that I feel like it's still a big deal when he comes out with something, even if it's something really big or something middle ground like Allied, which I thought was pretty decent. Or we get stuff like Welcome to Morrowind, which is just embarrassing, and everybody involved should be embarrassed, except maybe the visual effects artists. But it's not just him. And I learned this very late in the game. The two of the producers are Alfonso Cuarón and Guillermo del Toro. And if that's not enough, del Toro is listed as one of the writers. So there's really no reason to if you knew all that stuff going in, it would have seemed like there would be no reason to be skeptical, even despite being a remake of a movie that already has sort of a reputation of its own. Especially a movie that was so identifiable by like the Henson contributions, which usually really elevate a movie, and that's kind of the thing you take away from, and that's the key factor to the movie and what makes it work. And now we're getting the same story by a director that loves CGI like hardly any other director loves CGI. And but I mean, obviously Zemeckis has a bit more of a prestige to his name than, say, somebody like Michael Bay or something, or whoever you immediately associate with CGI or whatever, like Roland Emmerich or one of those. Because Zemeckis movies tend to be at least a little bit, either a little bit or extremely innovative. More so, it's kind of in the little bit category. And this, I don't know. So there's quite a few changes here from the original movie, and I have not read the Roald Dahl book, so I'm not entirely sure which of these changes may actually reflect the book more or the other way around. I really don't know. So, yeah. But with that in mind, going into it, it does at least have, like, when it first starts off, it's we get some of the differences, like the fact that our unnamed lead character, the kid, is actually in the car accident that kills his parents, and we get this really nice shot where it's sort of we stay on it enough where he's in the backseat of the car and there's like snow falling, and it's there long enough to convince you that it's him in the backseat as the car's driving down the road, but then the camera turns upside down and we realize that he's already in the wreck. And it's like that was like a really promising like kind of opening shot where it's like, all right, so clearly he's brought his visual style to this. So if nothing else, it's gonna look really good. This movie is, and that's pretty much the case for the most part. We do end up meeting Octavia Spencer playing his grandma now, who is in parts perfectly cast, but in other parts Octavia Spencer still doesn't look near old enough to be a grandma, so it was kind of conflicting, but yet she still feels perfect for the part anyway. And they have a relationship here where it kind of takes us more through the grieving process than the original movie did. The first movie did have that really good scene where they just like cuddle on the couch under the blanket and just cry together. It's really beautiful but brief and just says everything it needs to say. But I do also appreciate what this one did in a different way, that they kind of go a little more into that, especially with him going through the grieving process where like there's the whole scene where she's trying to get him to eat while he's still going through it. And to see that kind of relationship and the way the movie uses like a soundtrack made it feel like we were seeing familiar beats, like we know the story, but it still felt like a movie all its own. Like even when he gets the mouse, it's still it felt like its own thing despite telling the story we already know, which was really nice. But then obviously we're gonna get to a point where the witches are introduced, and then inevitably more special effects are introduced. And the thing that sucks about this is in the original movie, this was when that movie like really took off, like when that movie really kicked into gear and started going. But as soon as you see this CGI snake, and it's like, because I'm pretty sure, I mean, if it wasn't, it looked really real. I'm pretty sure that was a real snake in the original movie, in the scene when he's up in the tree and she's trying to lure him down with the chocolate. In this movie, it takes place in like a store, and it's a very CGI snake. And if there's one, as many movies have shown, if there's one, animal that's gonna be so obviously CGI when you CGI it, it's gonna be a snake. I can't remember the last time I saw a realistic looking CGI snake, no matter how good the behind the scenes work was. And that's what we have to look forward to for a lot of the movie. And it's also just confounding because it's like, I mean, how hard can it really be to handle an actual snake? I mean, they do it all the time, but whatever. In Zemeckis, he loves his CGI, so we're going to get as much of that as we possibly can. And we do, and that also comes into play in the backstory where we learn in the original movie we learned about how the grandma had a friend in childhood, and that friend was under a spell, I guess you could say, when she was caught by the witches, and it was that really eerie story. This is where I'm not sure if we're getting something out of the book or if it was already that way or what, but the story in the original movie where she's stuck in the painting and she moves around occasionally when nobody sees it, and then she's like aging within it until she just disappears. And there's something so equally eerie and sad about that. Like that's its own tragic story in itself. Like that just sounds like some sort of like bedtime story you would hear, something. It's scary ass bedtime story you would hear. And this one involves the girl turning into a chicken. And like I said, this is the case for like when I talked about Willy Wonka, another one of his, and it's like I I was surprised to learn that the remake doing the squirrel thing was actually what was in the story and not the golden goose thing that was in the original movie. Because I thought the goose thing made more sense, and I was really shocked to learn it was actually the squirrels that came from the book. This could be another case of that, where what the original movie did actually works better, but like I said, I'm not sure what is in the book, but I think the painting thing works significantly better, not just like on the screen, but just kind of from a story point in general. So there's that. And like I said, that whole effect is just we're not exactly getting peak Zemeckis when it comes to the effects, unfortunately. But we do eventually get the hotel, and like I said, this is when the original movie really kicked into gear, and it's where this movie starts to lose its way. So to kind of get that reverse was very unfortunate, and it pretty much sticks that way throughout the movie. So like it doesn't really bounce back much when you start to get the sense that it might not be that great once it reaches a certain point. And after such a strong start with some of the stuff they added and the bond we see between the kid and his grandma working here, it's unfortunate. So we're introduced to the Grand High Witch, who is Anne Hathaway now. Of course, Stringer is now played by Stanley Tucci, so it was very nice to see that Anne Hathaway Stanley Tucci reunion with Hathaway getting to be the more sassy one this time instead of the other way around. But this whole thing about Hathaway being the the Grand High Witch is that I know some people were skeptical to say the least, and I wasn't sure, but I was rooting for her, but I wasn't sure, and I don't know that this is it. Like I don't want to bash her too much because it's like a lot of stuff goes into the characterization of what exactly they were doing here, but this is another case of where it just really worked under like with the Henson stuff. Just made it really work, and you could make that character about as over the top as it could go. and make that's such a fantastic scene. Like, I wasn't a big fan of the original movie for a while. It had to grow on me, but when it did start to grow on me, I really, really just fell in love with that whole big sequence in the middle where the witches reveal themselves and Angelica Houston's Grand Eye Witch just gets to go crazy. Um, and it's a glorious scene, and she's a glorious villain. And what Hathaway is doing here is just not finding it. It's like I said, and I don't know that it's just the CGI, the really weird CGI. It's almost because you would think, because the thing about it is, and this is kind of the thing throughout the whole movie is, I think what really makes directors go towards CGI is because it feels like you can do anything with it. But it's like the great thing about when they were doing it at Henson style was that they were able to do it in a really animated way, but it still kind of gave it a bit of a limitation that it probably needed. And now that we can just let Hathaway go all in, it's all, even for this character, it's a lot, and that's saying something. And it's like, and like I said, I hate it when I can't, really, really be there when some actor, because there are times where I absolutely love it when an actor takes a role about as far over the top as they can possibly go if it suits it. But there's other things in play, particularly like characterization and stuff like that, and how much of reining in or whatever that the director's doing. It's very easy to fall into disaster when you're doing that too, and I feel like this is one of those cases. But like I was saying, the CGI is not really doing her any favors, but I don't feel like faulting it entirely either. So I think it's especially the case of it's almost like they were really trying to overcompensate, because now they've got her flying around in this scene and throwing tables and throwing her podium. Even throwing her podium is like this CGI concoction of mess, but yeah. And it's like, if the performance is there, there's not really too much you really need to do to like overcompensate. But like I said, the CGI versus the more practical stuff is so. I know it's a tired complaint too, and it's really easy to say practical over CGI any day. Because sometimes that may not always be the case, but it is in a lot of cases, and this one especially. So yeah. She's also so over the top that when she's doing and this is kind of a confusing criticism because there's two different things going on here. There's a running joke that her accent is so heavy when she's speaking normally that a lot of characters can't understand her. But what's funny about that is that before that was even a running joke, when she's talking with like her big CGI mouth, um, and she's like growling as she speaks, and she's saying things that are, I'm guessing, very threatening, but you can't understand what she's saying. She's saying words, but it just sounds like some like screechy animal noises or something. But I don't think that's not supposed. We're supposed to know what she's saying, unlike the later scenes where it's her accent that makes her hard to understand. See where it's confusing. It's but regardless of that, this is just it's it's one of those cases where the original really reminds you, like when you watch the original and you watch this and you're thinking about both of them, it reminds you just how boring it can be to watch CGI. Because it's obviously there are cases where CGI can be really, really incredible, and Zemeckis has done that many, many times. But this is more like, because I feel like it's talking again about that thing where like directors feel like you can do anything with CGI. I felt like not just on the limitation of one particular character, but especially with the mice once the kids turn into them. There's a case of the simplicity of the original movie and how there really wasn't a whole lot they could like crawl around to, because it feels like when you go, like when I say simplicity, it's like between the big scene where the witches reveal themselves in the original movie and then the kids turn into the mice, and then the big dinner scene, it feels like there's really not much in between those scenes at all. And the dinner scene is the end, and the reveal scene's in the middle. So there's really not a lot of like bloat to the original movie at all. And so here, obviously, they're going to have them running around in a lot of different places, and also bring in some different things. Like there's a lot of things with Hathaway's cat that don't necessarily need to be here. Um, and then they go into, once we get to the ending, this is something I can kind of get behind, but not necessarily in the way that they did it. Um, the idea of having a bit more of a confrontation at the end with the Grand High Witch herself, because it's all with the ending of the original movie, it's just kind of a whole lot of chaos, and then Rowan Atkinson just cuts her in half or whatever, and that's it. But here, obviously, we get a bit more of a climatic showdown with her, I guess. But it's, like I said, that sounds more appealing than it actually turns out in the movie itself. But the idea, I don't mind, of giving it more of a confrontation between just her, like making her more of a final villain rather than just dying amongst all the chaos. Which I appreciate that about the original movie also, but that's where I'm saying I can also see how making it more of a confrontation at the end could be good too, but not. Yeah, once again, this just isn't it. But I can see, like, I was talking about how I'm not really much on what Hathaway's bringing to the table here, and what they've done with the character, but it is a case where I can see, like, maybe, possibly, like, children of this generation taking to this maybe in the way that the others do. Because there's a lot of movies that, like, we grew up with that like, really stick out to us, that if we saw them at our age now, back when they came out, we may very well have just passed them off as shit, and, like, for maybe this particular demographic or whatever. So it's like, if there's a generation now that, like, hasn't grown up with Angelica Houston's movie, or Nicholas Rogue's movie, I guess you could call it, and, like, you go back and you say, like, Angelica Houston taking her face off, like, scarred your childhood forever. It's like, I'm sure there's going to be some portion of this generation that could say that about Hathaway. It's like, there'll be people who are, like, when they're in their 20s, like, 10 or 15 years from now, they'll be saying stuff like, when I saw Hathaway in The Witches, my childhood was fucked, or whatever. But it's, because there are some moments, like, when they're, not many, but there's some, like, when we first see the witches at their tables in the dining room at the end, right before Hathaway spots Octavia Spencer. That's just kind of a creepy shot of them just sitting at their tables, just the way it kind of pans over creepily to them. And it could have probably used more than that. But, so, like I said, maybe they're a factor like that of when people talk about how, seeing Nicholas Rogue's movie at an early age scarred them. I'm surely Hathaway's going to do that for some kids, but it's just hard to imagine it sticking in the way, Houston's portrayal did, so there's that. And then finally we get to, like, the very, very end, and I guess I don't know if I want to say much, but once again, not sure if this is the book's ending or not. It's not the original movie's ending, but it's interesting. I remember when the first time I saw the original movie, and it actually felt like it was going to end a certain way before the last few minutes. And I remember being really like, that's really how it's going to end? And this movie may or may not have gone with that. Like I said, that feels like it would be a book thing. But like I said, I have no idea. So I almost feel like it would have to be, though. But if it's not, props to this movie for going that direction. It's still a pretty awkward ending. Once again, like everything else, you can say the idea of it and it sounds cool, but the execution is so far off. So yeah, so yeah, there was a strong start here, but like I said, once it got going and it got to the portion of the movie where the original really took off, this just went the opposite direction and never really recovered. But it's not like completely terrible or anything. And it's probably, I imagine some people that are more attached to the original than I am will probably really, really hate it. But I don't. I'm not going that extreme with it. But it's just kind. It's unnecessary, I guess. And like I said, I've never been anti remake, but this will probably just come and go. And from a director like Zemeckis, and that he like co-wrote it with Del Toro, and Alfonso Cuarón's name is also on it. That's probably one of the biggest insults you can give it. One of the more disappointing things about it is that it just kind of comes and goes. So that's unfortunate, but you know it's there in all of its CGI glory if that's your thing. So yeah. So we're not done talking about remakes. We're going to be doing that as well. I can't decide. I'm talking about a remake that just came out on Netflix. But I'm also doing its original movie as a versus, and I've been trying to figure out which of those I'm going to do first. I don't know, but I will figure that out soon because it's the next thing. And then all the other stuff coming. Like I said, a shitload of stuff still. We're going to pile into the last week or so here, and then we'll go from there. So until all that stuff, I think that's it for this.